Okay, let's look at some example problems here. So problem number 1, you are a member of a research team. You need to decide whether to conduct a survey with a margin of error of plus or minus 3% or 2%. What sample size would be needed to achieve each goal? So let's say you wanted a margin of error of 3%. So I'm going to write that as 0.03 equals 1 over the square root of n. That's a simple way of using this margin of error formula above. If I convert my percentage to a decimal, I no longer need to worry about that 100. And then because the 3% is a plus or minus and our equation has a plus or minus in it, we don't really need to worry about those. So to solve this for n, I'm going to multiply both sides by the square root of n. So I get 0.03 times the square root of n equals 1. To get the square root of n by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by 0.03 to get that the square root of n equals 33.3 repeating. But we don't want the square root of n, we want n squared. So I'm going to square both sides, or I'm sorry, we don't want n squared, we just want n. So we need to square both sides. We're going to get that our sample size for us to achieve a 3% margin of error is 1,111 people. Now, let's say we wanted a margin of error of 2%. So I'm going to set up my formula 0.02 equals 1 over the square root of n. To solve this for n, I'm going to multiply both sides by the square root of n. I get 0.02 times the square root of n equals 1. Divide both sides by 0.02. I get the square root of n is 50. And I just want n, I don't want the square root of n. So if I square both sides, I get that n is 2,500 people in the survey. So if I want a margin of error of 3%, I would need to survey 1,111 people. But if I wanted a margin of error of 2%, then I need to survey more people. I need to get more people's data so that I can be more accurate. So that would require surveying 2,500 people. The second part of this question says, suppose the finance director would like to reduce the cost of the survey by using a random sample of 200. What would be the margin of error for this sample size? So let's use our margin of error formula. Our margin of error is plus or minus 1 over the square root of n times 100. Now our n here is 200. So I'm going to have plus or minus 1 over the square root of 200. And then our answer is times 100. So I'd want you to use a calculator at this point. Go ahead and go to your graphing calculator. You're going to do 1 divided by the square root of 200. You get 0.07. So to convert that to a percentage, you just multiply by 100, just like our formula suggests. So that is a margin of error of plus or minus 7%. That's a pretty large margin of error. That means that when we conduct our sample and we get a statistic, that our statistic is either 7% above the actual parameter or it's 7% below the actual parameter. So that can be incredibly misleading. So that might be too large of a margin of error for this company to feel comfortable displaying their results because it's such a large margin of error. The next question here asks, what random sample size would produce a margin of error of plus or minus 1%? So 1% as a decimal, sorry, I'm still a highlighter, is 0.01. So we could use our margin of error formula, plus or minus 1 over the square root of n. To solve both sides for n, I just get 0.01 square root of n equals 1. Divide by both sides by 0.01, so the square root of n equals 1 divided by 0.01. 100, but we don't want the square root of n. We want n squared. So that means We would need to survey 10,000 people in order for our margin of error to be less than 1% away from the parameter. The next question asks us what margin of error can be expected when using a sample size of 500. So again, we're going to use our margin of error formula, plus or minus 1 over the square root of n. Here n is 500, so plus or minus 1 over the square root of 500. So 4.5% if we round, because if we multiply this by 100, that gives us our percentage. So 4.5% is our margin of error if we survey 500 people. The final question in our very short notes for this week are, what are some reasons that a research center might decide that a survey with a margin of error of plus or minus 3% would be more desirable than one with a margin of error of plus or minus 2%? So some reasons might be cost effectiveness. It would take less money. It would also take less time because it's a smaller sample size. So there would be less people for you to survey. Okay, so again, I know that was a super short set of notes, but that is what I'm going to give you for this week. So this week, you're going to be focusing on your Pearson Realize assignment for section 11.5, and then you also should be finishing up your stats project and submitting that to Schoology. Please make sure you're looking at the rubric and make sure that you have answered every single part to that project so that you are not losing easy points. Please reach out to me via email if you have any questions or concerns. If this is the last time you are hearing from me before spring break, I hope that you have a safe, healthy, and fun spring break, and I really hope that I see you again after spring break.